All right. Well, we're shifting gears. Last talk was more of a heady talk, important talk, and again, trying to anchor you in Scripture. I didn't get into all of the scientific, I'm a scientist, I'm a biologist, and some of you say, well, that's all well and good. The two narratives don't fit. And since I trust science, I guess I'll just go with science, But I just want you to know, since I didn't go into all of the scientific reasons why Darwinism is bankrupt and all the other secular, like the origin of life and the cosmological, the Big Bang or origin of life or Darwinism, all of those theories are bankrupt. And they're not just bankrupt in that they contradict Scripture, they are bankrupt scientifically, okay? And just a quick book endorsement, my book, Darwin's Sandcastle, sort of covers the waterfront. I mean, I hit a bunch of different topics. There are many other resources. This is not the only one. New Creationism by Paul Garner. And then if you just don't want to read books, but just want to go on online content, go to Answers in Genesis, lots of articles there, written to be understood by just normal people, not just science geeks. Creation Ministries International, they have a lot of good articles that are written in a very understandable way. And you might have specific questions like, what about dinosaurs? What about radiometric dating? And I answer some of those questions, but I can't answer them all because my book would be too thick. So this sort of covers what I think are the most important topics. Darwin's Sandcastle, Roman Roads Press. And so there's my book endorsement, but there are others. So shifting gears to natural, I'm as Josh Egren said, I'm a senior fellow of natural history. You might wonder what natural history is. Natural history is pretty much biology. Just an old, more of a classical name. It's the study of animals and plants. There's a slightly different perspective on it. When we think of biology, it's more of an experimental, sciencey study of life, much more experimental, much more quantitative. Quantitative meaning you measure things, and you can apply it to math. You might think there's math in biology, mostly simple math like measuring things, but natural history is much more qualitative. It's not so experimental. It's much more observational. Like if you're a bird watcher and you're just interested in what the birds, where they live, where do they migrate, what they eat, and that's natural history. It's biology, but more qualitative, not quantitative or analytical. So, natural history to the glory of God. What I want to do here is show you that it's very easy to think of biology as just curriculum. I wrote a book, right, in the dance, it's curriculum, okay? And it's as soon as you hear the word curriculum, you glaze over and you go, oh, work, schoolwork, stuff I have to memorize. And we disconnect it to the author of life, okay? And I really want to break that disconnect. I want to abolish that disconnect. Next, let's see. I'm going to get into presenter mode. So, let's, next slide, please, Jaeger. Okay. First of all, definitions. I already mentioned this. The scientific study of animals or plants, especially is concerned with observation rather than experiment, and presented in a popular rather than academic form. I like that. And I did the academic stuff, did my reproductive ecology, Eastern box turtle, a lot of graphs and lots of quantitative stuff, and wrote in very dry prose, dry, boring prose to make it acceptable to a scientific journal, and then published it. So that's the science stuff, but I also love to make it fun. I want people to see the glory of God in creation, which means you present it in a more popular form. What does glory mean? Glory refers to the manifestation of God's presence and attributes, highlighting his worth, honor, splendor, supreme power and majesty, resulting in praise, worship, and thanksgiving to God. So rather than think of biology as just curriculum, I want it to usher you into seeing God as the author. I mentioned that in Riot and the Dance, the first movie, Riot Earth, where I used the example of Michelangelo. I like to think of biology as theology, as a subset of theology. Theology is the study of God, and we normally think of, well, we're studying God in his moral attributes, his power, he created everything, and we read the Bible to study theology and other books that are making commentary on the Bible. But theology is a study of God. God is the creator. God is the author. He's the architect. He spoke the world into existence, the galaxies, the planets, the nebula, all of the stars. He also created biological life. It's a spoken word. When you study all of his artwork, you are studying God. Okay? Life is God's living outdoor museum of his glory. And it's sort of hard to get over that hump that says, no, it's curriculum. It's supposed to be boring. I hate that. Okay? And so I want to try to break that down. I want to tell you one story. Let's see. Oh, I'll get to the story in a bit. Next slide. Okay, why natural history? Well, there's several reasons. One, Genesis 1:28, which is called what theologians call the dominion mandate. And he told man to rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and all that creeps on the ground. He is to rule over everything. That's the dominion mandate. In other words, if you read that verse carefully, half of the dominion mandate is global wildlife management. Well, and domestic life management. So whether it's agricultural animals, livestock, pets, whatever, as well as wildlife in general, in order to manage it well, you got to know about them. We are given the task to manage all of biological life on this planet, which means we need to know it. We need to know it. Now, not everybody needs to do everything, obviously. There's division of labor, and not everybody is called to that. But as a people, as God's image bearers, that's our corporate responsibility to care for all of the wildlife on this planet and domestic life. Secondly, and learning natural history is a step towards that. You can't take care of a wild animal if you don't know anything about their habitat, about their food requirements, about their migration. All sorts of things tie into managing that well so that they don't go extinct. And we think, oh, save it from extinction? That's a bunch of environmental nonsense. Are you kidding me? Christians are the ones that should be leading in environmental stewardship. But what we do is we just react against those crazy environmentalists and go, who cares? Who cares if they fall under the bus? You know, oh, we have dominion, who cares? More of us, less of that. You know, that's not good dominion. Secondly, natural history displays the wisdom and glory of God. We see in 1 Kings 4:33 and 34 that Solomon, when it's talking about Solomon's wisdom, I better read it, I don't want to butcher it. In 1 Kings 4, it says, his songs, Solomon, speaking of Solomon, he spoke of trees from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He spoke also of beasts and of birds and of reptiles and of fish. So Solomon was the first biology teacher. And it says, and people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon. So actually learning about animals and plants is wisdom, because this was discussed, this is presented in the context of talking about Solomon's wisdom. They came to hear his wisdom, which includes the natural history of birds, reptiles, animals, fish. Okay? And there's all sorts of reasons why that's wisdom I won't go into. If you want to, there's another book called Differentiated Green that I wrote earlier that goes into more detail. Third, displays care over his creatures, Psalm 104. I just will read one passage from Psalm 104. You cause the psalmist is saying of God, you cause the grass to grow for livestock and plants for man to cultivate, that he may bring forth food from the earth, wine to gladden the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, bread to strengthen his heart. All of this, all of these blessings are from biological life. Plants, oil, where's the oil from? Probably olives. Olives are plants. Olives are fruits of olive trees, and they press it, get olive oil. It's all from photosynthesis. All of it is from the hand of God. And bread to strengthen his heart. That's from wheat and grains. Okay. Wine, grapes. Okay. All of this is from the hand of God. The trees of the Lord are watered abundantly. The cedars of Lebanon. What about the wild stuff here? Because plants for man to cultivate, grass to grow for the cattle. But it says, the trees of the Lord are watered abundantly. The cedars of Lebanon that he planted. In them the birds build their nests. Wild creatures. The stork has her home in the fir trees. Just clear cut it, man. Who needs storks? No. The storks have their home in the fir trees. The high mountains, I love this. The high mountains are for the wild goats. Another translation says, the high mountains belong to the wild goats. What do you mean? We have dominion. Let's take over every square foot, and if all the animals go extinct, so be it. There are some Christians that have that view, and they don't realize that the animals and plants are not just for him. Yes, we can use all the animals and plants for our blessing, for our food, but there's most of the animals and most of the plants God made have absolutely no practical use to us. Why did he make them? Why did he make all that stuff if we don't use it? You know, what are the animals we use? Well, sheep, goats, pigs, chickens. Oh yeah, that's just a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of what he made. Okay? God made it and said it was all very good. So he displays his care over creatures. He displays models of good and bad character. Proverbs 6:6 is an obvious one. Go to the ant, sluggard. You can learn a thing or two about industry and diligence and hard work if you go look at some ants. Okay? Or if you need to stop being so stubborn, read Psalm 32:9. Don't be like the mule that has to be turned by bit and bridle. So he uses for good and bad character. He displays his might in creating various creatures to humble Job. At the end of Job 38 through 41, the main question is, why do bad things happen to good people? And finally, after all of his friends start, they're deriding Job, saying, you're in sin, you're in sin, you're in sin. This is why all these bad things happen to you. And when finally God breaks into the conversation and, pins everybody's ears back, he doesn't go into a deep philosophical explanation of why he is allowed to do this. You know what God does for several chapters? He just talks about his animals. That's all. You go, this is a non sequitur. We're wanting to know why bad things happen to good people, and God is talking about ostriches and hawks and horses and donkeys and Leviathan and Behemoth. Why can bad things happen to good people? Because I am God. And let me show you some of the creatures I've made. That is the only justification that I need. Look at my creatures. And sit down, shut up. Okay? That's that. I mean, in essence, he's talking about his animals. Because he is God in no uncertain terms. And he can do what he wants, including making these awesome creatures. So what I want to do is we tend to like big, charismatic animals. Biologists call them, I love this. You know what biologists call big animals that we all want to see in nature docs, including the ones that our film crew goes to film? They call them charismatic megafauna. You know what that means? Big, cool animals. They always have to put some highfalutin term, charismatic megafauna. Well, I love non-charismatic microfauna. I like little things. Because some of the little things, we've all seen elephants. Yay! I love elephants. I have no problem with elephants. And I love whales. Great, big, charismatic megafauna. We want to see that. But don't let the charismatic megafauna make you forget about the little stuff. Because God made a lot more little stuff. And what I want to do is just hop, skip, and jump through a few things that I think are so cool and so small and are overlooked because of that. Next slide. I'm going to start off with something that you might never have seen. Maybe you have. Bird's nest fungus. They can be out in the moist woods on Moscow Mountain, but I've seen them under the rose bush at our house. Most people just see them as tiny little cups. They're called bird's nest fungus because they form a little cup. And it looks like little discs inside it that reminiscent of eggs in a bird's nest. And those little discs are called peridioles. And they've got fungal spores in them. And what they do is they splash out of the cup, and then those little discs break open and little fungal spores sprinkle out and then grow into more bird's nest fungus. But the complexity that God put into this insignificant little fungus displays his glory. I wrote an article for Answers magazine, and this is a picture they developed for me. Here's the cup. Again, the cup's only maybe 3-4 centimeters across, 3 or 4 millimeters across. You can see the little, next slide. You can see the little peridioles down there are the eggs. That big blue thing is what? A raindrop. Yeah. Big raindrop hits the cup. Boosh. And when it hits that cup, just like if you had a little teacup with a bunch of Skittles in it and dumped a bunch of water into the teacup from high up, the water hits the teacup and the Skittles splash out. When it hits, those peridioles on some species, because there's a bunch of different bird's nest fungus, are a little, just barely attached to the base of the cup, but not very strongly. So as soon as that water hits, they get ripped off. And they're underneath the peridiole. Some of them have this tiny, delicate sleeve that as soon as they get yanked out, the sleeve tears away. And when that sleeve, that middle picture, you see the sleeve, it's very, very thin, and it just rips away. And inside the sleeve is a little tiny cord called a funiculus. That means little rope, if you Latin people. Funiculus means little rope. And when that sleeve is ripped, that little rope comes streaming behind the peridiole. And it kind of like an arrow with a rope attached to it, goes flying up out of the cup. And this is no big deal. It might just kind of hop out of the cup and onto the dirt. And that's fine. But sometimes it gets splashed up a few inches, and it might be under a bush. Like I said, I found them under a rose bush. And sometimes the peridiole jumps up high enough to go over a twig. And when it goes over a twig, kind of, the end of the cord has got a hapteron on it, which is, biologists love to make words. You don't need the words unless you're describing it, because you run out of synonyms for doohickeys and thingamajigs. But the cord goes over the twig, gets dragged behind, and then the hapteron is sticky. And when the cord gets dragged over the twig, the hapteron is hit and it sticks. And then the peridiole falls down and then goes and wraps around the twig. Kind of like a tether ball. You know how when you hit the tether ball and the rope wraps around the pole? That's what happens. It goes and wraps up and hitches the peridiole up a few inches from the ground. It rips open and the spores sprinkle out. God just puts in all of these cool little nuances, and we are blind to them because we look at it and go, do we have to know that for the test? Well, yeah, the vocab kind of makes it drudgery for us, but this is why I like doing it, because I'm not going to quiz you guys afterwards. You don't need to know it for the test, for the quiz. I want you to know it because it's God's glory. And He puts glory into the littlest things, not just your big humpback whales that jump out of the water, which is cool. But this is cool and small. Chameleons. Next one. All things are created by Him, all the millions of life forms, and I'm not exaggerating, millions of animals. But chameleons, there's certain groups of animals that God says, I'm gonna really soup this one up. And he doesn't have to make them big to soup it up. Like I said, with the bird's nest fungus, these guys are flattened bodies, and they can get flat, especially when they're displayed in territorial bouts, and they can just kind of flatten side to side and just be skinny, super, super skinny, and their ribs fold up. And if you look at them front on, they're like, how do you get that body so flat? And they often pose that flat side to their enemy or who they're the female that they're trying to impress, and start doing a jig with their big flat billboard side. They have prehensile tails. That's a fancy word for monkey tails. They wrap around branches. You go, well, okay, they wrap around branches, but from a biologist perspective, and you look at all of the musculature of a wraparound tail and all of the nerves that have to go and make that tail a fifth appendage to grab. They've got their four legs that grab the branches, but then they can grab the branch with their prehensile tail. They've got projectile. Now I'm going to spend some time on the projectile tongue, because it can extend the length or more of its body. I'll cover the next, and then I'll go back to the projectile tongue. Zygodactylous feet is another fancy word for two opposing three digits. So if you look at a chameleon, they've got a bundle of 3 toes and a bundle of 2. On the front, actually, it's 3 and 2. 2 on the outside, 3 on the inside. And then on the back, it's reversed. 2 on the inside, 3 on the outside. And that's how they grab branches. So it's really weird, their digits. Independently movable eyes. So one eye looking that way, one eye looking that way, or one eye looking that way, one eye looking that way. Both eyes looking that way. They're just on turrets. Variable color patterns, and then if you go into how they can change color really fast, you're talking about physiology that blows your mind as far as the colors and all of the chromatophores embedded in their dermis, and they can change colors instantly because it's under nervous control. Like, whoa. But let's look at the projectile tongue, because that's cool. Next slide. The tongue of the chameleon, whether it's the dinky little pygmy chameleon of Madagascar, that's adult, is about less than an inch. The adult is less than an inch. And to Meller's chameleon, which is like that big. So got a lot of different kinds of chameleons, but they all share this apparatus that's made of cartilage and muscle. And the tongue is like a wet, fleshy sock that's stuck over a hard rod. Okay? Now that first picture, you just see the rod. It's called the entoglossal process. Nothing to make you want to learn it more than that, right? Entoglossal process. The tongue is slipped onto that like a big tube sock onto that rod. It's all scrunched on, and it's sitting on this apparatus that hitches it back in their mouth pretty deep. When they want to see and hunt an insect, they start to move slowly up the branch, and they get that insect in their sights, and then they open their mouth just a little bit, and then you see this blob of a tongue come up ready to fire. You go, how does that thing fire? Well, like I said, the sock is on that rod, and there's this accelerator muscle. And that accelerator muscle is circular and wraps around the rod and goes and then grabs the rod violently. And the rod is tapered so that when it grabs, and it's so slick in there inside the tongue, And when it grabs it violently, it slides off and accelerates. That's how it launches. It pinches and slides because it's slipping off. If you had like really wet, slimy hands and grabbed a tapered rod, and you grabbed hard, the harder you grabbed, the more you would slide off of it, okay? And it launches the tongue super fast and accelerates it so fast, and at the end of the tongue is this big fleshy blob, like a mucus-covered boxing glove. And just gets launched out, and because of the momentum, it stretches the tongue out because it's going so fast, and then that boxing glove hits the insect and sort of wraps around it, and it's all mucus covered, sticks it, but plus it kind of engulfs it. And then how do you get it back? Because now you've got the insect, but your tongue is sort of decelerated and will just kind of dangle. So we got to get it back into the mouth. So they have longitudinal muscles, not just circular muscles that shot it out, but longitudinal muscles that pull it back and slide it back onto the rod. Once they get it back on the rod, then the whole apparatus goes back, kind of like how they move cannons forward and backwards on an old battleship from the 1700s. You know, master and commander, roll the cannon forward, roll the cannon back. And that whole apparatus kind of moves it back and forth inside the chameleon. Again, you don't have to be big to show the glory of God. Stingers, cnidarians. Let's see, I might have to not get through everything, but that's okay. I'd rather explain. Stingers of cnidarians. Anybody been stung by? Okay, I have. Chesapeake Bay, back when I was a kid. Jellyfish, you bump into a jellyfish and you might get stung. Not too bad. On the tentacles of the jellyfish is something that's even way, 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 way smaller than, say, the tongue of the chameleon. The chameleon, you can actually look at everything with the naked eye if you dissect a chameleon, which I don't want to dissect because I like them alive. But here it's all microscopic. On the picture there is a zoom-in ink drawing of the epidermis. And so the skin cells are just regular epidermis, but then occasionally you've got this cnidocyte, which are these stinging cells. Inside the stinging cells are nematocysts. And nematocysts are these organelles inside the cell. Cells are small, but nematocysts are even smaller. They're inside the cell. So if we go to the next, if we take that thing that's sticking out of the epidermis that says nematocyst, it's actually a cnidocyte. The nematocyst is inside. Next slide. We've got the cnidocyte. It has a trigger. So if we look at the one on the far right, we've got the cnidocil, which is the trigger, and that is a microscopic little hair sticking out. Your leg touches that trigger. That changes surrounding that green blob. It's not really green, I just highlighted it green. It changes the permeability of that membrane surrounding the green. As soon as that permeability changes, water comes flooding in to that capsule, and inside that capsule is a coiled up finger, like a rubber glove, like you know when you have a rubber glove you're washing dishes with and it's inside out, what do you do? What do you do with a rubber glove that's turned inside out? I don't wash dishes anymore. We've got a dishwasher. You blow it, put it up to your lips and go, and all the fingers go and pop out. What happens is water floods into that capsule, and that there's a coiled up inside out finger that's really long, and just like a rubber glove finger that pops out because you blow on it, that thing pops out because of the inflow of water. This is all happening at the microscopic cellular level. It pops out, and as it pops out, next slide. That's the finger popping out. And as it pops out, a split second, little stylets and spines snap out like switchblades, cut a microscopic hole in your flesh, and then in goes the tube, just like a finger on a rubber glove. But the end of the finger is cut off so the venom can go in. Because, see that green, which is the venom? The green, as the water flows in, it not only pops that thing out, but shoves the venom up through the hollow interior of the finger and into you. Okay? Go back the previous slide. So stylets and spines are switchblade-like. They cut a hole. The tube is a flexible harpoon-like hypodermic needle that goes into you, or a fish or whatever prey they are getting. And then the injection mechanism I mentioned, and then they're pumping into you neurotoxins that hurt. They hurt, and if enough of it, they can start to give you numbness and paralysis. When you get stung, you're not just discharging one, you're probably you're just a light touch on one tentacle, you're probably discharging several hundred into you. And you go, ouch. Okay? If it's a box jelly, it's more than an ouch. You might go to the hospital, you might die, okay? Because it's got really, really, that's the Australian box jellies in northern Australia. So really amazing stuff. So biology, again, can just be curriculum, or it can be the glory of God. Next slide, bolus spider hunting. This is an amazing little spider. Most of us haven't seen it. They are found in the southern United States. They're not very big. They're sort of an ugly looking spider. Their abdomen looks like a bird dropping, and that's what they're camouflaged as on the leaf. They just look like bird dropping on a leaf. No one really inspects them. But at night, they swing off the leaf, build a horizontal cord. They don't build an orb web like other orb web spiders. They just build a horizontal cord, then a drop cord off of that, and they're hanging from the drop cord. Then they secrete. This is amazing. This is how they hunt. Rather than trapping something in their orb web, they secrete a pheromone, which is perfume of a moth. It's a specific perfume that attracts the male moths of that species. The moths come looking for the female moth and starts flying around the bolus spider. And then he pulls out a thread from his rump, from his spinnerets at the tip of his abdomen, and puts a blob of glue on the end, and like a very skillful cowboy, starts going thwap, and lassos. But it's more like a gaucho of South America, because they use boluses, not lassos. That's why it's called a bolus spider, because bolus is that ball at the end of these. They had like a cord, a whip. It branched into several cords with rocks on the ends, and they'd swing them around and throw it at a cow or a calf, and the rocks would whip around the legs and spin around the legs and then trip it up. Well, this bolus spider swings it around, thwap, hits the moth, and then reels it in, wraps the moth up, and then might go hunting some more. And then sometimes he changes perfumes and says, okay, I did that species of moth. I'm going to change perfumes and pull in another species of moth. Thwap, roll it up for eating later or now. This is just incredible dexterity. They have several different types of silk, plus they have to put the glue on the end. How did that evolve from an orb web? I think I'm going to stop making just this sticky trap, and I'm going to make it into a bolus, plus all of the coordination for it. Well, I'm going to just wrap it up here, all of it. Let's toggle through several slides and get to the conclusion. I'd rather have taken less time on some of these, or more time on some of them and skip others, to get done on time. Conclusion. Well, some of them I don't have up here, but one is don't think of it as just curriculum. Yes, we sometimes have to study for the test, for the quiz, but have it usher you into God's glory. We're so busy that often we don't ponder the intricate and the little things of life. Be still and know that I'm God, Psalm 46:10. We often we never sit still. It's like, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? We're this ADD society. It's like, we got to be doing something. Rather than sit down and ponder the glories of God. So much is going on under our feet in our backyard, and we just miss it all because we're like, gotta scroll on my stupid phone. It is the glory of God to conceal things, but the glory of kings to search it out. God didn't give us all the answers. He meant for us to be curious about his creation. And some things aren't just in the textbooks. There's lots of things that haven't been discovered yet, but we're too dull and too uncurious. What's the opposite of curious? Uncurious, non-curious. We're just not curious. And we miss out on so much. Back in the old days, kings were the only ones that had the leisure time to search things out. That's why it says a glory of kings to search things out. But now we've got all sorts of free time, kind of the free leisure time that kings only had back then. So we can all look at the glory of God. And great are the works of the Lord, studied by all who have pleasure in them, not studied by all that the teacher makes study, like you must study for this. Yes, we might have to, but don't just think of it as I've got to do this because that's the curriculum. It's God's world. And do it, yes, because it's part of the class. Maybe it's not part of the class. Do it because great are the works of the Lord, studied by all who have pleasure in them. Again, it's not a got to, it's a get to. God doesn't say you have to go stick your nose under a bush and look for bird's nest fungus. You don't have to. But if you're curious about God's world, if you find pleasure in it, then study it. So, with that, let's pray. Father, thank you so much for this time. I pray that you would be giving us a curiosity, a wonder. I pray that everything that we see in your world, that it would instill an awe, a wonder, a glory, that we would give you glory and praise for all of it. In Jesus' name, amen.